welcome to the MessianTics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Hey everyone, welcome to MessianTics. Today we're going to kick off a conversation about kind of what our life looks like now that we've exited the spring high holy days. So we've made it through Passover, we've made it through unleavened bread, through Shavuot, and now we're Rabbi Toby and I were discussing, trying to figure out
the musical terms.
You know, we've come through the crescendo. You know, of the spring, and now we're in the and we've also hit the decrescendo at the end, and now we're in the valley. And I could, for the life of me, cannot remember what the valley is called.
We were looking up the orchestral terms for what's really quiet.
Yeah, and
I looked it up. I actually literally wrote into Google what's the musical term for really quiet, and it's pianissimo.
So
yeah, because piano means quiet, pianissimo likeissimo means very quiet, and I wasn't good enough for John. John's like, no, it sounds like something else. I'm like, dude, that's what it is. It's very quiet.
Yeah,
it's not, but yes, the crescendo of Passover into Shavuot.
Yeah, we've wrapped up, and my 8th grade music education is failing me.
We're in the decrescendo into the pianissimo of the summer before the crescendo of.
You mean you're learning to march in the military? Didn't feed you any of these terms too?
Yeah.
No, dude. All you need is a drum and didn't know the difference between left and right. It was that's 3rd
or at
grade.
Least be able to fake it.
Yeah, that's 3rd grade. So I made it through that at least. But so we're in the summer now,
which is the pianissimo.
Which is the pianissimo of the high holy of the biblical calendar
the Jewish
year.
The
Jewish cycle, and it's interesting because every year, and the more you spend time in Messianic ministry, and even just being even within Messianic Judaism, I think most people don't really recognize it, but definitely when you're in ministry, you absolutely recognize like those high and lows. Yeah. And the summer is definitely like it's almost like we're in like public school or something. Like we get the summer break, or summer off or whatever. We get kind of June through August. We get time to, I guess. I don't know if I want to say recuperate, because summer's also like busy for us with conferences and traveling to things. So
but at least generally speaking, of those conferences, with exception of maybe a few short minutes. I say generally speaking, but that's not true in my case or Rabbi Toby's this year. But generally speaking, those conferences, we really don't have a lot to do. Like, we're not running the show. We get to kind of breathe.
Sure. But so in a general ministry sense, summer is kind of a season to kind of breathe out, relax, and so a lot of us will be not so keyed up for the next 3 months, just because there's not as much to do other than just kind of
do the Shabbat service,
weekly studies, going and visiting with people as needed, that kind of stuff, and So anyway, what's I guess we kind of want to hit on like what are some.
What's it feel like to be able to breathe?
Well, yeah. What does it feel like to be able to breathe? What do you do in the summer?
Yeah.
And I even have some ideas like that that I want to try out this summer that I really didn't think about until this spring. So, any of y'all want to answer one of those?
For what? Like, what am I answering?
So, how do you view the summer for yourself?
Okay,
like,
when I was a youth leader, that's actually, speaking from a youth ministry perspective, that's when things are amped up. That's when it's like, okay, we're going to go to a retreat, or we're going to go rafting, or something. Yeah, because
all the kids are out of school. Which, congratulations to all the graduates, by the way.
But from a congregational leadership standpoint, this is my first real summer. Starting this because when I came in last year, it was. July was when we moved here, but Rabbi David was very intentional about I don't want you doing fully anything until September. So I really wasn't fully involved until then. Yeah. So this is the first one.
But you've experienced it from the worship side,
from a worship side,
and stuff like that.
Yeah. From a youth side, it was when things get amped up.
Yeah.
It was like when parents start saying, "Okay, what are we doing this summer? What's going to be? Are they going to have a big trip? We just need to know to prepare and dates and stuff like that." And and that was when we were more intentional about doing like a lock-in and things like that. For a worship leader, it very much is a time to breathe, because worship teams work very hard.
Yeah. Especially for high holy days.
Yeah, especially for high holy days. Chazans and rabbis, are running and gunning during those times. How does it feel? Just getting off of Shavuot. Yeah. So for me, Brooke and I are, we're taking a trip next week. So yeah, we like want to get away for a few days. So definitely there's that feeling of, okay, let's, literally take a breath, but also, kind of get that reconnect with God, not reconnect like we weren't connected, but, hit refresh, or whatever. And,
sure,
because this year's gone by so fast anyway. And honestly, summer's not that long. I mean, it really isn't. Because August is when you start thinking about high holidays anyway.
Yeah. Well,
I would think.
Summer's only 3 months. And we're already in month 6 of this year.
Yeah.
So, 3 months will go by that.
Yeah. And it's a big conference season for the Messianic movement. You have the UMJC, which we'll be attending, and then the Messiah Conference.
You got Messiah early July, and then UMJC is kind of mid to late July.
Which, Brooke and I are actually serving in a capacity at the UMJC, so the expenses there are considerably less. Like, we don't have that at the Messiah Conference, so we're not attending because, we're having to put all of our chips in that bag, because we actually have childcare and stuff for that time, but we don't have the money to take all our kids to grant them for the Messiah Conference. I would love that, but
we're gonna go next summer.
I want to go to Messiah next year because it's a voting year and all that kind of good stuff.
So we're gonna pinch our pennies and
so maybe I can.
I think it'd be great if we all went up at the same time. It'd be kind of fun.
We're not going to Messiah this year. I would love to, but we're not going to Messiah this year because we're in the middle of our project with our house, and I just can't justify the expense while we've got while my family's living in a camper. So
absolutely.
But no, I think to kind of, I guess, help veer the conversation some, or maybe start some direction for it or whatever. Speaking from having been, I know both of you are relatively newer to the congregational leadership side of this. Rabbi Toby in the last 6 or 8 months, and Rabbi Jonathan about 2 years now, almost 2 years now, and
2.5 years.
But it's been the last 20-ish years of my life that I've been in some sort of a facet of congregational leadership, rabbinic intern, assistant rabbi, associate rabbi, senior rabbi, what have you. And what's really intriguing to me, and I talk about this with some of my pastor friends, is in the church world, Christmas and Easter are the big push, the big drive, right? So you have extra service for Christmas, extra service for Easter. If you do multiple services, then you've got extra 3 or 4 in one day or whatever. But it's usually like one day in the spring and one day in the winter, and that's kind of your big push. And then everything else is kind of life normal. You may have some extra activities or events or whatever here and there, but for us in a culturally Jewish expression of the body of Messiah and Messianic Judaism, we still have the 2 big seasons a year where there's extra, but that extra is extra. In the spring, we just wrapped up Shavuot, right? So we've got Pesach, and in Pesach we usually will have most people, like our congregation at Bradam's the same way. We generally encourage home seders for first night or maybe even second night, and then if you have a congregational seder like at CMC, we'll do we encourage home seders for the first night or the second night, and then for our congregational Seder, we do it later in the week so that everybody can still have their Passover Seder at home, but then still be able to get together and do one big Seder together as a community. And then there's also an outreach effort and stuff like that. But as we get to that, that's a big push for a really big event. There's a lot that goes into it. As a matter of fact, all in all, in just that one day, is about 8 hours worth of work and service type stuff with the Seder and everything that goes into that. Then we come out of Passover and we begin you've got the counting of the Omer and everything going on there. And as we work our way through that 7 weeks, we're really ultimately building to Shavuot. And so Shavuot rolls around and you've got another big event. And this year was really busy because we had Shavuot fell on a Thursday, Friday. And so we had Erev Shavuot service at our synagogue, and then we were involved in a Tikkun Leil Shavuot afterwards. It was this particular one's a virtual one with UMJC. So we were involved with the Tikkun Leil Shavuot through the evening, and then Saturday morning we had service, our regular Shabbat service, and then Sunday evening or Sunday morning we had a women's event, a men's event in the afternoon, and then Sunday evening we had a big joint thing at Bradam and so on that a bunch of congregations got together for, and so it was like a lot in that one 4-day period. Now we're entering the summer season where I guess in general life things kind of speed up a little bit, but now my kids are homeschooled, so like they're at home all the time. So our life really doesn't speed up in terms of our kids being around, but generally speaking for most people, life speeds up and gets a little more complicated as you're navigating all of that. But in the congregational life, we're in kind of a breathing period, a down season where we get to kind of, to some degree, coast for a little bit. I mean, we're planning for the holidays, but we're kind of coasting a little bit as we approach the High Holy Days in the fall, where we've got Rosh Hashanah, and in both of our congregations, we do 2 services on Rosh Hashanah. Then our regular weekly services are still running. 10 days after Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, and we both do 2 services for Yom Kippur. And then regular Shabbat services in between. And then we've got Sukkot right around the corner after that. So within the course of 3 weeks, we have upwards of 6 to 8 extra services all in that time. And then during Sukkot, both of our congregations actually open our property up for people in our congregation to camp out over the weekend that falls during Shavuot for community building and so on. And so I participate in that. I know Rabbi Toby and his family are planning on participating in that this year for community building and being involved with the people in the congregation and so on. And so in the spring, there's a lot, and in the fall, there's a lot. And then you've got Hanukkah that rolls around, and we do a big Hanukkah event and all this. But this season in the summer months is a kind of a chance to take a breather and just sit back and be able to like catch our breath and refocus, realign as we are preparing, but also kind of bouncing back from. I know one thing that my wife and I have done in the past, we haven't done it as much the last couple of years since Hurricane Sally and COVID and everything, but what we were doing for years is after Passover, or either after Passover or after Shavuot, we'd get away for a couple of days just to disconnect. We'd go away for a couple of days. And then the same thing after the fall feast. We would get away for a couple of days just to disconnect and kind of catch our breath again and relax. And so it's really cool that this season, just that opportunity to stop and breathe and kind of find a little sweet relief from the hectic and the crazy, and kind of get back into some of the normal congregational life, normal family life stuff. I know at least for my wife, I don't know about you guys, but my wife, sometimes she definitely feels like I prioritize the congregation a little more than I should in some, and during those seasons, that's very much unfortunately the case. There is a prioritization of those things, but this is an opportunity to really kind of refocus and realign in every aspect of our lives from a congregational ministry standpoint. So just something we wanted to kind of play around with and talk about what life feels like now as we've hit this downslope, this valley, as Rabbi Jonathan was calling it.
Yeah.
The decrescendo.
To the
pianissimo.
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 No.
I would not do Italian well.
Probably not.
Say it again.
Pianissimo.
Pianissimo.
Yeah, that's it.
Pianissimo.
It's like saying piano, then adding the issimo.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
But no, it's nice. I mean, it's not that the congregation does nothing, during that summertime, but there's definitely, I think there's more of a
just closed in the summer.
No, it's definitely a more relaxed approach because we're talking about stuff. I mean, we were talking about the possibility of maybe like doing a mikvah or an immersion. We've talked, I've been talking to David about, just having another, because we usually do the synagogue movie nights.
Yeah.
Where we do a family-friendly movie.
That'd be fun.
And it's just where people show up, and hang out and stuff. So it's stuff like that.
It's nice when we do it. We'll either do it, we do it either inside in the sanctuary, or if the weather's decent, we'll do it outside when it's cool and comfortable. But we'll set up a big 100+ inch screen with projector, and when we do it inside, we run all the audio through our sound system.
Yeah. So stuff like that,
Sounds
So things that are very laid back as far as if anything's planned.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because God, He plans those cycles for a reason. I know a lot of them are based around harvests. Because you have the first fruits and all that, and then you have and then with the fall feast, it's the latter rains.
Yeah.
So there's these God centered it around harvest as well. But so then the break is always interesting.
Yeah, I think this summer I'm going to try to more intentionally brace, because this is actually really probably the first summer I've thought about the fact that it is a slower season, and so we're doing a little more family oriented stuff this summer. For example, we're going to visit with my family in Charleston in June. I have a cousin getting married.
Such a cool town.
And so I love Charleston.
Yeah.
I've been there several times, and it's just it's the perfect mix of history and beautiful architecture.
Do a tour of the Jewish history. There's a very, very old Jewish history.
I basically told my family, if I get to do anything else, because we're going to spend a week in Charleston. My dad will be he works overseas, so he'll be in town. And we're going to spend a whole week there together. And I said, if I get to do anything, I have to go to I forget the name, but the old synagogue in Charleston, which is it's in the top 5 of the oldest in the United States. Yeah. And I was like, I have to go see that. And if there's a Jewish quarter, would love to see that, because my family is Carolinian. My mother's side is Carolinian, and the more I read about the Carolinas, and that there was a significant Jewish presence in the Carolinas, mostly due to Charleston.
From what I understand, because Danielle and I had actually interviewed with a Messianic synagogue in Charleston years ago, before we started CMC, and from what I understand from the research that I've done and talking with people that were there, is that what we think of New York City as, in terms of kind of being the hub of American Jewry, since probably World War II, maybe a little bit before that. The Charleston, South Carolina was that for years upon years. And so it still has a very, very, very active and present Jewish community. Chabad is there. There's several Orthodox synagogues. There's several conservative, several Reformed, Reconstruction, kind of all over the place. There isn't necessarily, at least my understanding, there isn't necessarily a centralized hub where the Jewish people all kind of live.
Sure.
There are parts where there are heavier populations, but they're kind of scattered. Probably
not so anymore. I know that in my reading about South Carolina's Jewish history, a lot of them came. Reform Judaism was the first Judaism in South Carolina. Now, of course, it was Reform Judaism in the 1700s and 1800s was not
different than it is now.
It was not the Reform Judaism. It was probably more akin to conservative Judaism today. But a lot of them spread out from Charleston into the countryside. And I was reading this article about kind of what we talked about, last week, on halakhic issues. There was almost this very embracing attitude between them and a lot of Christian groups in parts of rural South Carolina and even Charleston. There was one guy who was an ordained Methodist reverend who was the rabbi of one of the synagogues in South Carolina, and he was another Christian pastor was talking about how he was so appreciative that Reverend so and so was able to come and speak at their church that weekend, and it was just very interesting cultural dynamic of the Judaism was not assimilated into becoming not Judaism, but they were very embedded into the a lot of them attended Methodist churches if there wasn't a synagogue available in their area, which was I thought also interesting.
It's also a really cool aircraft carrier you can tour there.
Yes, there is across the bay. If you're in the center of Charleston, it's across the little bay there. But I always go out to Sumter. Every time I go out there, I go to Fort Sumter.
I like that bridge right there by the aircraft carrier.
Yeah, it's a big bridge.
I know bridges.
But so anyway, so that's where we're going. So I'm just, this summer for me is like, it's the first summer that I've really thought of as like, oh, like I actually have time that is not like pressed to get ready for our holy days. And I want to get your thoughts on
that can be a scary question.
Yes, I know. I always, whenever they say that, I always think of the song in Beauty and the Beast when the Gaston song where he's like telling his little, sidekick buddy, he's like, I've been thinking. He's like, a dangerous pastime? I know. It's like, yes, it is dangerous.
What is this?
Huh?
Which one? What's your dangerous pastime?
Oh, the thinking can be a dangerous pastime. Oh, okay. But I was just carrying on with David's joke about asking y'all's thoughts on. I'd heard a pastor talk about how his church gives him like 4 weeks. A year off, and it was after a busy season. So I think it was after Christmas, I want to say, either Christmas or Easter, after one of those kind of peak seasons. And he spends those 4 weeks kind of on, quote unquote, sabbatical, writing out at least all the big holiday sermons. So he actually like spends time, in the Word, studying for the upcoming Easter service, the upcoming Christmas season, Advent, Pentecost, all those. So I was curious, like, what do y'all think? What are y'all's thoughts on
Advent? Is Christmas, right?
Advent is the season of Christmas. Starts like late November, doesn't end till like mid-January, and of course depends on which Christianity you're in. But what do y'all think about like taking the summers and like studying each of those sections in regards to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and at least having the beginnings of your messages for those high holy days, but just by like taking time to set aside to focus and to study on those particular things about those things, not necessarily waiting to be in the season, but going ahead and getting ready and having your thoughts kind of pen to paper, and that way when it comes time week of, you're, instead of spending you're not stressed. You're not
planning an extra several sermons in the midst.
Exactly. Exactly.
I would love to say that would be beneficial for me.
Okay.
But my brain doesn't work that way.
Sure.
So like I know if I am working on like so Parsha Naso is this week, right? The Shabbat. I can't think about Parsha B'Halotcha while working on a message of Parsha Naso.
Sure.
Because my brain will twist them and it'll mess me up.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not, again, like, obviously, like, I could never work a week ahead on one. It would just be too confusing to me. Like, I'm the same way in that regard. But, like, if it's, like, 3 or 4 months out, if I set aside an hour a day for, like, July to, like, just tackle each one of those, and not even, like, necessarily put anything fully together, just to be reading about it and learning things I may not have noticed before, or things that other people have said before.
Yeah. I think it'd be a cool idea if for instance, like, and I did this a few years ago to some degree. I wasn't able to like plan it out months in advance, but I was intentional on this a few years ago, where the Fall Moedim are they're a building theme, right? So Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and they build upon each other thematically. And so I actually did something I rarely ever do, but I did an intentional sermon series during the season of the High Holy Days. So both services of Rosh Hashanah, the Shabbat service in between, both services of Yom Kippur, the Shabbat service in between, and all of the Sukkot services were all one flowing sermon series that built upon each other. Each sermon built upon the last, and what have you. And so I could see if you were able to arrange something like that would definitely work.
Sure.
Which I've thought about doing, especially with having Rabbi Toby on staff with us now, because it wouldn't be me having to plan out 8 messages in a series, but the two of us working together, building upon each
alternate.
other. Yeah.
So I was just curious what y'all thought of, I guess, quote unquote, working ahead in that regard. Just so that way, because there are high holy days I've gotten to like week of, and been like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about, no idea what I'm going to teach
Yeah.
about.
I've gotten sermon block. You got writer's block where you just can't think of anything to write.
Yeah, no,
I've
that's
gotten
tough,
sermon
yeah.
block where it's been like day of. I was in the shower and went, oh, that's where we're gonna go. We're gonna.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with working ahead as long as you're still open for God to
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
because even the best of us can get ahead of God. I mean, I look at the prophet Nathan when he told David, when David said, I'm going to build a house for the Lord, Nathan goes, oh, whatever's in your heart, David, do it. And God came that night to Nathan and said, hey,
No.
he is not going to build the house.
Yeah.
Go back and tell him. Nathan had to run back and say, hey, David, you're not going to do it. So I actually think that's interesting. We look at these prophets like they were almost like not human, because they said some really, really amazing things,
Yeah.
and some really majestic level things.
I've heard some average people say some pretty amazing things.
Right. Well, I think that they were average people in some ways.
Yeah.
I think that they were definitely called. I definitely think they were called to extraordinary circumstances. Don't get me wrong, but I look at, I look at Nathan as an example of, hey, even the prophets don't always hear right from God, and God runs interference. I mean, even Amos was just a fig tree farmer, and he gave his prophecy, and then he went back home, to tend his fig tree. So he's a normal guy, right? But so I think that as long as you're open to understanding that, because I'm the same one. I don't work ahead. I generally, like, for instance, I'm speaking. I'm giving the message in next week, which is Behalakha, and so
it's good parsha.
And I'm looking at that, and already, and sometimes I do, and oftentimes this is what I do. This is like, and this may turn into this kind of conversation, but this is what oftentimes happens. I'll read the parsha, and literally, like, I start talking to myself. Mm-hmm. And I literally start, I'll walk around the house, and even Brooke will be like, what are you doing? I'm like, that's just kind of how the Lord, by his, believe me, grace.
He does it in the synagogue too. We'll be in the office. He'll be working on a sermon. I'll give him props for this, because he'll work, like Bahadul is next week. He started working on it probably a week and a half ago, in preparation. But He'll sit down at his desk, and he's working on stuff, and then arbitrarily he just gets up and walks and goes into the sanctuary, and about 20 minutes later comes back in. Sorry, I had to get up and walk. I was thinking, I was trying to work through this.
And I literally start talking. And yes, like, it's like I'm talking the message through, like as if I'm giving it. Mm-hmm. But make no mistake, the first person who's getting the message is me. Yeah. Like, somebody will come up to me, and I think the biggest compliment I get is when someone says, man, that spoke right to me. Yeah. And like one lady said to me, oh, you were stirring all up in my own, you were all up in my Kool-Aid today, like basically saying that you were, that whatever the message was speaking to her business. What?
I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before.
Yeah, but I just said, well, the Lord's always doing it with me first, I can't give a message about something that I don't experience. Like, I can't talk to the people about, like, for instance, if the message is about repentance, I can't talk to the people about, hey, you need to, always be examining your heart, always be in a state of confessing your sins and repenting and turning from them. But what's been happening is God is confronting me about the things in my heart that I need to turn from and that I need to confess. And but no, that's what I do. Like, and it becomes this conversation, and oftentimes, most of the time, something will happen with one of my kids. Like, and if you're not a parent, it's hard to relate to that. But if you are a parent, then you understand, like, that unlocks this whole new way that God speaks to you. Yeah. Is through your own children. And especially, like, Jonathan, yours is still a little baby. Yeah. But when he gets older and starts talking and really making his own mistakes.
Has a will of his own.
And he gets a will of his own. Then you really start to see, then God starts unlocking this. Because right now you're, like, in this state of grace with your baby. Yeah. Because God will speak to you about that. Because God, like, you'll hold your baby and God's like, what's he doing for you? Nothing. God's like, what do you think you need to do for me to get me to love you? Nothing. God's like, there we go. Yeah. Right. So, but yeah, that I do. But David's right. Yeah. Like, I'll start just walking but I don't do that weeks in advance. Usually, I don't do that like months in advance is what I'm saying. Usually it's like, like David said, like a few weeks in advance, but I don't think there's anything wrong with lining up your ducks. as long as you're open to God's coming. And I know that you are. I'm just saying.
Yeah, like most of my messages are like days before, if not like I'm not gonna be. I'll be honest. Like sometimes it's like morning of. That I'm got kind of what I'm gonna speak on. But
and that's the thing is, I think sometimes we confuse God's ability to, like, our willingness to submit to His lead in a message with so that I'm trying to figure out the best way to word it. So if the Spirit speaks through me in a message that comes to me that day, and I can get up that day and preach it, right? That's me being willing to submit to the Spirit, and the Spirit speaking through me. But the same Spirit can speak through me if I'm willing to submit to Him in advance too. Right? Yeah. So if we're prepping in advance, the same Spirit, like, there are times where I know, like, I usually will start looking at a parsha. So parsha Naso is this Shabbat. So this past Saturday night and Sunday morning, I was already starting to look at parsha Naso and starting to prep through it and kind of brainstorm thoughts and listen to what the Lord's speaking to me and what have you. Because like Rabbi Toby said, a message better speak to you before you speak to anyone else, right?
You can't.
And so I started looking through it, and there are weeks that on Sunday night, I have a general train of thought of where that message is going. I may not have the message put together. I may not know definitively exactly what references I'm going to use and what connections are going to be made, but I have a general train of thought. And then, there are weeks where by Tuesday, I've got the whole message done. But then there are definitely weeks that it's Friday night, Saturday morning. That, I'm not going to lie. There's been times that I've sat in my office on Saturday morning, 45, 50 minutes before service, punching my sermon reference or scripture references into the slides for the message, because it was that morning that I finally knew what God wanted me to talk about, and was able to put that message together. So I think there's definitely a variance in there. But I think if we are truly submitted to the Ruach, if we're truly being led by the Ruach, by the Spirit, that the Spirit can move in the same way, whether it's advanced prep submitted to Him or day of. And I think there are different brains that operate in different ways. I'd love to say that everybody could prep 2 weeks in advance, but to be honest, most of the time my brain just can't work that way.
And mine normally doesn't. And it's just something I wanted to try. I was thinking about, well, I've got this summer. I'm not stressed out by getting ready for holy days and like all the other things. So let's see if that works for me. And if it does, then maybe it'll be something I continue to practice in the future.
I think it's a good thing to have reverence as a congregational leader, as someone who speaks from a pulpit or a bema. I think it is so important to have the utmost reverence for what you're doing. Because there should never be a situation where I look at you or David or somebody in the congregation and say, oh, I can put a message together in 30 minutes, or I can, one, I can't. But I think some people get into that group, get into that, like, well, I can just put a message together. I'll just throw a few scriptures up, And that is incredibly dangerous. And I'll tell you why, because it's pretty hefty when a person comes to you and says that the Spirit of God spoke to them through something you said, or when somebody changes their life because of something that you said it, right? But God, of course, you're just a vessel. We know that. I'm just saying that if you don't have respect for the process and what the process is, no matter how long it takes, if you don't understand who you're getting it from, and you're lazy about it, and you take it for granted, because I can't imagine being in a situation where I'm standing up there and I'm saying just something from me, because if it's coming from just you, I think we're going to do damage to souls,
not necessarily. I mean, you can say your own things, and you could tell people like, this is my opinion on this.
Sure, I just mean
my thought. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I also want people to know.
I just think to respect the process.
And I think it's one of the reasons why James tells us, not all of you should desire to be teachers, because there is a hefty expectation and responsibility of teachers to be able to teach well.
It's this idea of you have to teach well, and there's this sacrificial level to it. Like I've always told Brooke, I said I would rather be a guy that someone remembered that some guy said this to me, and God, it changed my life, and then them not I'd rather them not remember my name, than know that it was that guy that said, you know what I'm saying?
I heard that one time,
or something like that's kind of how I feel. I think, and I pray that I still stay like that, because everybody has a tendency to not. But like I was listening, I was on this morning when I was just doing like some devotional time before David came and picked me up. I was I jumped on Instagram, and there's this pastor that does a podcast, and he says some stuff that I think is just like, man, I could just do a podcast on just some stuff this guy says. He's very real and stuff like that. He talks of, but one of the things he says, and I don't want David to take this the wrong way, because I know David writes books, but he says, man, he says some of these churches, they become book clubs. He goes, the pastor is a bestseller in his own synagogue, or his own church, not synagogue, his own church, and everybody just thinks the way he does, and everybody, and I was just like, for me, it was just a warning of, okay, you really do have to make sure that what you're doing is from the Lord,
Yeah.
And I just like that he said that, because ultimately what he's saying is that churches and synagogues that become, or just places of worship that become centered around a personality.
Yeah.
And I just don't want that to be anything that I'm remembered for, is my personality, but I thought, and I'm not knocking writing books, by the way.
No, I get what you're saying.
But you know what I mean. It's like,
well, and there's been a big problem in the body with, pastors writing books, and then, heck, you've got a number of big scandals where, big name megachurch pastors wrote books, and then, became New York Times best-selling authors because their church, through church funds, bought a crap ton of their books.
Right.
Yeah.
And many of them just got destroyed because they sat in storage somewhere forever. But they bought a crap just to get the name up at the top of the list and whatever. Writing books, like the particularly the books that I've written, that I think really matter. Like, there's a couple of them that were just kind of cathartic. I did this work, I put them out there. But like Spirit and Truth, and then the one I'm working on right now, and the One New Man, are books that I really think are messages that need to go out, right? That I think that the body needs to hear. Yeah. But they aren't anything that I think, like, I don't stand up in front of our congregation and say, "Thou shalt buy my books." Thus saith the Lord.
You're not expecting to see your books at Barnes.
You actually never. Well, he never talks about his books. I've never heard you talk about your books at spot service.
And it can be misused, misdone. But at the same time, like when it comes to to a degree, I think congregations should take on the words and identity of its teacher or teachers, because that's discipleship. Discipleship is about replication. And if you to a degree, you are going to look like the people who are teaching you and training you.
I just don't like when leaders of places act like they're doing something revolutionary when we're working off of the ultimate revolution. I mean, Yeshua's already done something revolutionary, right? Yeah. So I guess that's what the thing is. It's like, I think the wrong spirit is that is this whole idea of starting a brand or a trend. Yeah. When Yeshua already branded and trended.
Yeah, it's not about starting a revolution. It's about being a faithful servant. And that's oftentimes.
Well, it's not more revolutionary than the cross, right?
Yeah, it's not, and it's it requires humility to know that everything you were doing is the same thing that everyone else is supposed to be doing, and I think, and it's you are. But again, I think it's why I think it goes to the idea of understanding, kind of like we joking about the chain of command earlier in some of our off conversations. Like it's why Yeshua tells his disciples when the centurion comes, he's like, I had not seen faith like this in all of Israel. There's just this. When you understand who's at the top, what your job is, and how you're supposed to be, life just flows so much easier and so much better when you pursue doing that and help others to pursue their end, too.
So I don't think we stop. So tying this back to the summer break, I don't think that it's it's certainly not a time where we stop working.
No.
But we're not getting ahead of ourselves and necessarily like, okay, let's look to Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
But I do think, Jonathan brings up a point, and for me, it's like, man, it's a great opportunity to, of course, take a breather, but also, do a diagnostic on your congregation and make sure it's healthy, and make sure that because before we hit record, one of the things that me and David and Jonathan were talking about was the health of certain ministries in our congregation, right?
Yeah.
So,
but also I think that's something that the diagnostics is something that needs to be done like on a consistent basis in the congregation.
Yeah.
I actually, we don't do it mainly because we just don't have a large enough operation that we have that many things we have to look at on a regular basis.
Right.
But I really like the idea, like when I talk to pastors, friends of mine that are pastors at big churches, one of the things they do is on a almost a weekly basis. Sometimes it's a monthly, but generally it's a weekly basis. They'll sit down with their heads of ministry, their team leaders and all, and say, okay, what worked and what didn't work, right? What can we do to make things better? What is it that when I was at a buddy's church, I was speaking there one Sunday, and he was standing next to me and worship was going, and they did this one song, and he looks over at me and he goes, well, that song was about 3 minutes past the Spirit. You'll never hear it here again. Because he just recognized it didn't work. And he's like, all right, so I'm going to talk to my worship leader and say, hey, this is something that's not beneficial. It's not moving and where we need to go and whatever. I think there's something to that diagnostics and being able to sit down and say, okay, what's working, what's not working, what can we do better? That's in our membership process for our synagogue. We have you have to come for a certain period of time before you can ask for membership. Then we have a membership class that you go through, and then we have a membership application you have to fill out that goes through some information on like your background experiences in ministry and congregation life and what have you, and spiritual hurts and giftings and strengths and whatever. But and then once we have that, we sit down and we go over it, and then we have an interview with that individual or individuals, and we'll go through their application, the things that are pertinent, and what they're good at, where they see themselves fit in the congregation. But there's two questions that we ask everybody, and we don't allow anybody to cop out. And those questions are, what do you like the most about CMC? And what do you like the least about CMC? Right. And we're very intentional on those two questions because this is somebody that wants to make CMC their home, that they want to invest their time and energy in being a part of the ministry. Yeah. So knowing what they like the most tells us what areas we're doing really well in. And knowing what they dislike the most tells us the areas that, one, if it's something we agree needs to be addressed, it gives us those areas that we now have definitive data that these are things we can improve. This is how we can be better. And it helps us constantly move the congregation forward. And so I think that diagnostics concept is vital and important. But I do also want to point out that it's really easy, especially in today's world, with the fact that we've got more and more crap being thrown at us on a regular basis. Being a congregational leader, being a shepherd in a congregation is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult jobs in the world to have right now in this day and age. I mean, obviously we're generally, not always, but generally not getting shot at, so it's not quite as stressful as law enforcement or military or whatever, but it is a brutal job to have, and so there is something to the reality that is rapidly growing, and as painfully common as burnout is, to take seasons like this, yes, to think ahead, to diagnostically comprehend what's going on, decompress, to maybe start kind of doing some planning towards messages or events or whatever for the holidays coming up. But it's also important to be able to sit back and just go,
yeah, certainly.
And because you can't, I think one of the big problems, and we saw it with, you see it in some of the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, that there were those that, because of the scenario that were going on, that were in leadership there, that were completely burned out, but they kept working anyways, because that was their job, that was what they had to do. But you can cause so much damage operating from a place of just being burned out.
And then when you get out, you realize just how much pain you were in.
And I think we see, God says you're to work for 6 days, and the seventh day, the Sabbath, is to be a day of rest, that we stop and we focus on Him and we recalibrate and whatever. I think there's something to the seasonal approach to the Moedim as well, that there are seasons where there's big, repetitive events. There are things that are happening, but then there are seasons where it's a slow time. Yep. And granted, yes, the Moedim are generally around harvest times, and so that means that you're actually typically sowing and working the land and whatever in between. But but you have this opportunity to breathe because the real work is in the harvest.
Yeah.
Right. And that's our job as shepherds of our congregation, right? As followers of Yeshua, the real work is the harvest.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to be focused on the harvest, but we also need to make sure that we are healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, that we are healthy.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, like the last year at CMC, we've had some really good times and some really great things that happen. We've had some really miserable things that have happened too. And so I think these seasons in between are great times, yes, for the diagnostics, for the prepping and thinking ahead. But I think it's also important that we take them as an opportunity to breathe, to rest, to take that sweet relief. Not take our foot off the pedal so much, but to take the time to reflect, to introspectively consider where we are with the Lord, what He's wanting us to do, some of the things that have happened, being able to let them fall to the wayside so that we can move forward. Yeah. But I think when we're running, I think often we run from busy to busy to busy to busy, and in the periods where we're not busy, we think we're supposed to be busy because we're busy everywhere else too.
We try to fit things in and make it busier. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think sometimes we lose perspective on how to balance that out so that we are leading from a healthy place, so that our communities have healthy leadership that isn't burned out. I can tell you, when I get overstimulated, when I get too much going on, when I get too worn out and tired, but I'm still trying to do stuff anyways, that's when I have the higher tendency of saying something to somebody that maybe it needed to be said, but it didn't need to be said that way. Like, that's where I have the highest probability of doing that and causing the most harm. And I think it's important that we as leaders understand those areas of weakness that we may have, so that we can operate in those seasons of rest to be able to kind of recalibrate and hopefully not get burned out and have those things occur and cause more hurt and wounds than the world really needs.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I agree.
Yeah. So as we get ready to wrap up this episode, I do want to ask a question, since we're talking about it, and Rabbi Jonathan brought up the concept earlier, inadvertently, but brought up the concept earlier when he was talking about the pastor. He knows that he gets like 4 weeks off a year as kind of a sabbatical kind of approach, whatever. I'm a part of a group that meets once a month on Zoom, just to kind of talk, encourage one another, build each other up, etc. And one of the individuals, he's a pastor of a church, but one of the individuals that's involved in this, their church, it's a bigger size church. I don't know whether it's like mega quality, not mega quality, but mega classified or not. It's a quality church, whether it's mega classified or not.
Mega classified. What is that, like secret classified? Mega classified.
But it's a decent church, and one of the things that they're very intentional on is that every so many years their staff members have to go on sabbatical for 2 months. I was kind of curious your thoughts on that. Like, what would you think about it? How would you? And I really wish Rabbi Eric was here, because I know he's never done something like that. He's never just gone, okay, I'm walking away for 2 months, and not having anything to do with it. And in ministry, that's a difficult thing. Like, I know of people. I have a really good friend who's a rabbi who, tried that for 3 months. I think it was, went on sabbatical, and it's really difficult to completely unplug from that ministry, and when you're so used to having your thumb on the pulse. But there's also something too that every so often you do need that break. And I know of congregations that their expectation is every 7 years the leadership gets opportunity, based off of when they started. Every 7 years they get opportunity to go on a sabbatical for a month or 2 months or whatever it is. What are your thoughts?
I think it's important. For me, from my perspective, I think it's important. One, of course, the obvious answer is that it prevents burnout, which does happen. I mean, Brooke and I have been burned out, and we've been in situations where we've been burned out, and we were not treated with very much care or compassion. It was just, you got to produce. In fact, I went out of town. I was once complained to about how many trips I was taking over the summer when I had a full-time job in addition to serving at a congregation. And it was like, well, you're going out of town too much. I'm like, well, this isn't my only job. I essentially have 2 full-time jobs, I said, and the summer is definitely when I only have the one job, which is ministry, in preparation for, taking that job on again when I was a teacher. I had the summer, right? So I have been burned out. Definitely know what that's like. I think it's important It's an important muscle to flex as a leader, whether you're a rabbi or a pastor, whether you're a worship leader, whatever. It's important to lay down the mantle for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's just simply important to know that the ministry doesn't rise and sleep based on your ability. I mean, because I know people and have seen people who refuse to either put down the microphone, put down the guitar, or whatever, or, they'll refuse to do it because they don't want nobody else to do it while they're gone.
Yeah. And they just get burnt out.
And they get burned out.
Yeah.
But, you can't define yourself by what you do for God. He's already defined. You're defined by what He did for you.
Yeah.
Not what you do for Him. It's not to say you shouldn't serve, but I think it's important on two fronts, just to make the long answer short, to prevent burnout. And also, man, I had to spend, when Brooke and I were called out of Savannah, going from worship and youth leaders, there was a 4-year period when we were not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And that was important for me because God said, you have been in leadership for 5 years now, and you've been running and gunning, and I want to know that, are you okay with just being my kid and being fulfilled, or do you have to have a measure of authority? And I think some people, if they're really honest, couldn't do it without having authority.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it without having some level of power or prestige, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's important that they know that they can not take it or leave it, but you can lay it down for a season. Mm-hmm. Because that's just, because that births pride if you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Because there are times with authority, like conversations and things that come up that Rabbi Eric, and I'm right there with him a lot of times when he deals with stuff. But there's a little, he's the authority, he's the one in charge. I'm I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that. I wish he was here to comment on that, because I really am glad to be, the apprentice and not,
I've had those moments too.
Not the master right now. And I'm kind of all right.
So let me ask you, in an ideal world, being you two were really the kind of fresher blood in this, in an ideal world, given perfect circumstances, as a congregational leader or part of a congregational leader staff, where would, how long do you think an ideal sabbatical would be? And two, how many years of service do you think, or cycle of year services do you think is needed, or should be considered for that season?
I think personally it depends on how long the sabbatical is. I would not determine years of service to get to that sabbatical until we'd understood how long the sabbatical is going to be. If you were, for example,
but I think they go hand in hand. I think if you're going to do, they say every 7 years, 1 month, or whatever,
they play off of each other. For
and
example,
I'm not talking vacation. Vacation's different.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I agree.
I think 2 or 3 months. That's me.
2 or 3 months could be good. I think it depends on the size of the congregation too. I know several of my professors in college, they would take sabbaticals, but they would take 9 months to a year.
Yeah, I think that's too much.
But it was also not just, they weren't just unplugging. They were doing research in their field, visiting libraries in their field, archives in their field, doing, so it wasn't not in what we're talking about, I think, where it's a true unplugging. They were not really unplugging. They were it was just a different,
I would say,
wing of their work. But
I would say 2 or 3 months every 5 to 7 years.
I think that could be a reasonable, doable timeline. Now, I will say, I think it can be, we in our great American wisdom, with how we build, how we make, everything so business-like, we try to structure everything as being a super hard, and I think there should be guidelines. It's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, they're not actual rules. They're more like guidelines. I like having a fence to play in, and then we can plow the field as needed. Because, for example, there are things that I have in my bucket list and for life that I don't necessarily think. We when you come into ministry, you sacrifice a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up every goal or thing ever.
No.
For example, one day I'd like to hike the Appalachian Trail. that takes 4 to 5 months, So I'm like, okay, yeah, one day, maybe in 20 years, as long as my knees aren't shot, I'd like to be able to say to the elders and leadership of Bradam and be like, hey, I would like to be given leave for 6 months, and maybe would wait, because I'm a reasonable person, and so maybe if it's been 10, 15 years and I haven't taken any kind of sabbatical, be like, hey, it's been a minute. I have a goal. Maybe within a year now, let me plan on doing this, and if y'all could let me, and of course it depends a lot on who you have, like your dad, for example, like Rabbi Eric, like years ago could not have stepped away for 2 months. But now that I'm here, like he could, that's a realistic thing.
And you actually bring up a very important factor there, and that is that when if you do have a sabbatical system set up, the consideration for the length of that sabbatical also needs to take into consideration the rest of the team.
Yeah.
Because you take, for instance, if you've got a rabbi and an assistant and an associate rabbi, and you take that senior rabbi out for 3 months, that's 3 months that associate rabbi is carrying the weight of both of their roles. And so while the senior rabbi is away catching up, catching the breath, relaxing, figuring things out, whatever, the burden of 2 positions is on the shoulders of the associate rabbi, and vice versa. If the associate rabbi goes away for 2 or 3 months, then the burden is on the senior rabbi again. And so there has to be a consideration of that balance in there as well. For that. I mean, it's an interesting concept. I don't know that it's something that many within the Messianic movement have really taken the time to consider, and I think a big part of that is because of the fact that the overwhelming majority of Messianic Jewish congregations do not have the manpower to be able to do so. For most Messianic congregations, if the senior rabbi went on sabbatical for a month, there's nobody to run it because they don't have an assistant or associate. They may have some capable lay leaders who can kind of tie it, but if something were to blow up, if something were to go wrong, if there was an interpersonal problem that could explode the congregation, there's nobody there to help fight that battle for them.
Yeah, and that's why, even now, for the past, I'm already kind of looking at our youth, looking at some of our young adults and being like,
who's the future?
Well, who do I think I could go to and be like, do you want to be a Talmudim? Do you want to be a disciple? And then take them aside, kind of pluck them out, if you will, and pour into them and train them for years. So that way, eventually, and they may not be the assistant rabbi of Bradam in the future.
It's the assistant to the assistant.
The assistant to the assistant, the assistant to the assistant regional director. And, but having a pool of 3 to 5, and over the years it can grow, of people who are trained and qualified to be present, ready, and available to do, a lot of, even just teachings and studies and things while the senior rabbi is out. Because it can't. You actually lose momentum the less people you have, because then because like you said, there's just most congregations don't have the manpower to do. First of all, sabbatical, forget it. Most rabbis don't get vacations. Whether it's because of manpower or what. A lot of them just don't have the time or the ability to even take a week off, to be just away.
Or if they do, they save them up to be able to go to Messiah conference or something. Which, and I'm gonna stick this out there as we get ready to close this down. It's gonna be a bomb. As a rabbi's kid, and as a second generation rabbi with kids, I want to stick this out there loud and clear for all the Messianic rabbis and pastors that may be listening. A conference is not a family vacation. A conference is a ministry obligation. It is not a family vacation. Right. Do not take your kids to Messiah Conference or Southeast or UMJC Summer Conference and go, this is your summer vacation. Enjoy.
Obligation
That
completed.
Is not, because you're not able to devote your time to your family there. Some yes, but your attention is split. Even if you're not involved in teaching or leading or whatever, you're there to consume, not to sow into your family. And your congregation should not expect, and I think this is is more important. Your congregation should not expect that those conferences qualify as your vacation with your family. You still need time to get away with your family. Yeah. Your kids need to know that they are a priority. Yeah. And your wife needs to know that she is a priority. The conferences are not vacations. Yeah. So with that said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this one out today. And thank you for listening to our ramblings as we process through a lot of concepts of rest and in this season in between the Fall Moedim, Spring Moedim, and the little bit of breather and break we have here, while also prepping and getting ready for what's to come. And we will see you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.